So we are headed towards the end of the Parsha, and the way the Parsha ends, the way the episode concerning Bilam ends, is with his giving a blessing having to do with the ultimate future. So what his intent was to say that the Jews will be embattled by other nations through our coming history. Is that true or not? Has this happened or not?
Yes.
It has. Just as an aside, could Moshe have predicted that by ration? No, I just wanted to point this out, that there are so many things in the Torah that couldn't have possibly been known except through prophecy. It's really worth taking note of them. So in any case, it's true. So the curse part of it, of course, would be the continuum of exile and pain and suffering. But the positive, and this is what he was forced to say, is that all of this has meaning, and all of this leads us towards Mashiach's coming. So we're going to talk about today and tomorrow, although maybe we'll finish it today because there is more to the Parsha that I would like to get into. I want to talk to you about exile, redemption, and Mashiach. Okay, so exile doesn't mean being geographically out of Israel. Exile means being not ourselves. So you could be in exile and be in Israel. It's completely possible. So there are four main phenomena that are referred to as exiles. The first one is the Babylonian exile. So I want to give you a backdrop. So Jews in the desert receive the Torah, cross over into Israel. Okay, live for hundreds of years without a central government, this has no historical parallel. They were ruled by the Torah itself. Isn't that an amazing thing to think of? Okay, then that fell apart, and they moved into a monarchy and built the temple, and after 410 years the temple was destroyed. The Jews were sent out to Babylon. So the first exile is called the Babylonian exile. So I want to give you some backdrop about what was happening to the Jews, who the Babylonians were, and what happened to us in the course of this exile. So the Jews, as was predicted in the Torah, the more we prospered, the more we began to pick up the behaviors and patterns of life of the nations that surrounded us, because materialism generates that. The more materialistic a person is, the less of a sense of self they have. So we were warned again and again by the prophets against idol worship. We learned yesterday about the draw of idol worship. You remember that? But we were also moving towards bloodshed and crime and all of the things that result from that, towards sexual immorality and all of the things that go through that. And we were warned again and again that the evil would come from the north. So Babylon, which in today's language would be Iraq, was north of Israel. So before the Babylonians attacked, another nation came into the play. They were called the Assyrians. So the Assyrians began a process of conquest. They conquered most of Israel and expelled 10 of the 12 tribes. Okay, so the 10 tribes lived in the north. They were called the Northern Kingdom. They were expelled by the Assyrians. Where did they go? So we don't really know past their immediate destination. They went towards a northern area of Central Asia, and from there they wandered, and we don't know where they are any longer. So that's what we mean when we talk about the 10 lost tribes. So we have some idea of where they may be. I don't know if you're aware of this. Does this interest you? What happened to the lost tribes? Okay, like how do you lose a whole tribe? Whatever. Okay, lose my glasses, but a tribe? Okay, but in any case, so the way they got lost is, of course, through assimilation. So they were lost on the inside before being lost on the outside. So the Ethiopians are probably a lost tribe. So they weren't lost in the sense of, no, we were always here, we were in Ethiopia, okay, whatever. But they lost themselves in terms of being part of the traditional Jewish community. They lost Hebrew reading and writing, they lost tradition to a large degree, but retained a strong sense of being Jewish. They were persecuted for their being Jewish. They kept Brit Milah, they kept Pesach, they kept Yom Kippur, they kept Shabbos to some degree. It sounds like conservative Jews in Long Island to me, but that's another story. okay, didn't read Hebrew, didn't understand Hebrew, but did know the Bible. So when the state of Israel was established, and even before, they kept in contact to some degree. In the 80s, they wanted to come here. So a movement that was called Operation Moses, go down, tell my people they can go, was brought into being. There was huge controversy about this because there are many tribes in Africa that claim to be Jewish. What do you think is in it for them? Why would they want to do this?
What about all of Israel in Africa?
Yes, Israel, like the median lifespan for man in Israel is 89. The median lifespan for man in Rwanda is 31. Okay, clear? So there's a great deal of skepticism about whether the people who claim to be Jewish are Jewish or not. So because of this, a lot of research was done into the Ethiopian community. Rav Ovadia Yosef, who was the major Sephardic scholar last generation and died only recently, did research on them and determined that they are definitely of Jewish origin. And not only that, they're probably descendants of the tribe of Dan. And in fact, the name Hadani is the most prevalent last name amongst the Ethiopians. So we have one lost tribe kind of back. That leaves only 9 more. Okay.
Are there some in China, like some people come out in China saying?
No, the Chinese, there are those who call themselves the Chinese Jews, but they're not a lost tribe. What happened is the Jews from Iraq were in trade. This involves the Sassoon family and various others. They moved to China. Members of these Iraqi groups moved to China around 150 years ago, pretty much assimilated with the Chinese. They lived in a place called Kaifeng. They may or may not have some descendants, but if they are, they're descendants of Iraqi Jews. They're not a whole tribe in themselves.
What about India?
Ah, so that gets us to someplace more interesting. There are a group of possible Jews in India who call themselves the B'nai Menashe, and a different group called B'nai Ephraim. This gets confusing. They together often refer to themselves as a Beta Israel. And there are other Indian Jews who are, again, descendants of Iraqi traders. Okay, clear? So the descendants of Iraqi traders, again, lived in India. They were involved in the drug trade, among other things, which is why Jews are always like so good at business. Okay. They lived pretty much exclusively in Bombay, a little group of them in Calcutta, and a huge complex that was bought by the Sassoon family. They're all related to each other. All of the Indian Jews who are of Iraqi descent are related to each other. They all have biblical last names: Abraham, David, Samson. Okay, do you know any Indian Jews? So the Indian Jews who are Iraqi of origin are almost all in Israel. Okay, meaning they have all left India, but most of them are in Israel. Some of them moved to England, some of them to Australia, and a sprinkling to the United States. The reason why they left India was after the fall of the British Raj in 1948, just like a certain other country, okay, whatever. Life for them no longer had attraction. The economy failed. They were there for economic reasons. There was prejudice against them. They left. So it's not uncommon to find Indian Jewish families who are of Iraqi origin who have children all over the world, literally. Okay, clear? Like my daughter-in-law's family, okay? So, but the ones who call themselves B'nai Menashe are not of Iraqi descent. They claim to be actual descendants of the tribe Menashe. So they also keep Jewish practices. They keep Shabbos. They do know Hebrew. They keep Pesach. They keep Yom Kippur. They don't look like us, okay? They look like Indians. It's much more controversial than the Ethiopians because they have very little written record of who they are. And their observances are certainly tinged with the observances of the other people of India. So although the Israeli government has recognized them, they do have to convert formally, as did the Ethiopians, to be acknowledged as Jews in Israel. There are large numbers of B'nai Menashe who live here. More are probably coming. The B'nai Ephraim are a whole other story. They are not of Jewish origin. They only claim to be of Jewish origin after the B'nai Menashe made Aliyah, where, again, life in Israel is a lot better than life in rural India. So there's a great deal of skepticism about the B'nai Ephraim. However, what's happening now with them currently is that they're converting properly in India. So if they do proper conversions there, they probably will be admitted here. So those are the current missing tribes. The Pathans are maybe Jewish in origin, but they certainly have all converted to Islam and are no longer practicing Jews. But they look like us. In fact, I remember when bin Laden became famous, I heard his pictures in the paper. Nobody knew who he was yet. You know, this was like a long time ago. I see a man pick up the phone. I know him. He davens right here at Imre Shefer. And I'm saying, no, he doesn't. No. Yes, he has a gray beard, long nose, looks like us, but like, no. So that's what happened to the 10 tribes. But 2 tribes were still left. Okay, the Assyrians tried to conquer them, failed, because they did tshuva. So you could see a direct cause and effect, but the tshuva didn't hold. So they were expelled by the Babylonians. The Babylonians were led by a man called Nebuchadnezzar. This is an important name in Jewish history. He was brutal. He was the first person to seriously get somewhere in a plan of world conquest. So although the Assyrians were the first ones to try it, he's the first one to actually succeed in conquering what was then the known world. Now here's where things get tricky. People love a winner, is that true? Mm-hmm. Okay, so because of this, the Jews had a very dualistic relationship to the Babylonians. On one hand, they hated them because they were cruel and brutal. On the other hand, they admired them. Could you understand this kind of a relationship? So this is where, until the Holocaust was there in full force, this is how Jews in Germany felt about the Nazis. They were admired and hated at the same time. So but the expulsion was brutal and horrific, but as soon as they were in Babel, the Jews began to settle in there and do well. Okay, so in fact, they thrived. So next thing, the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. Okay, so the time that the Jews were in Babylon under Babylonians was relatively short. So they didn't move anywhere geographically. They're still in Babylon, but now Babylon isn't Babylon anymore. Now it's Persia. So the way this happened was that there was prophecy about how long the Babylonian reign would be, and in fact, one of the prophets, Daniel, became important in the Babylonian court because of his wisdom. Okay, so the son of Nebuchadnezzar was called Evil Merodach. If you're going to be a horrible brute, being called evil, Evil is a good name for you. He was succeeded by his son-in-law Belshazzar. Okay, Belshazzar was giving a party one day. A party. Think building too. Okay, whatever. Okay, a party, and he was taking out dishes that were stolen from the temple and serving on them. Have you ever heard the phrase, "the writing on the wall"? This is where it comes from. It says it in the book of Daniel. Suddenly there's writing on the wall in the middle of the party, and it says, "Maneh, maneh, shakel, utvaklin." Count it, weigh it, it's now. So they summoned Daniel, who was a wise man, said, what does this mean? Like, what is this mysterious writing? He said, basically, you're doomed. As he was talking, the Persians broke into the palace, killed everybody at the party, except for Daniel, and for a little girl who escaped by hiding. The name of the little girl was Vashti. Okay, do any of you know who she was? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the thick Platons, as they say. Okay, so the Babylonians are now out. The Persians are in. Okay, clear? The Persians were allied with another country called the Medians. So Persia, Media is one nation, and they're now in power. Okay? So you have various rulers entering the picture. So to give you a timeline, the destruction was in 66, and now we're moving, at this point, how many years is it? It is 62, it's 18 years ahead of that. We're getting closer to the return. Okay, so various Persian rulers ruled. One of them gave permission for the Jews to go back to Israel. Then it was rescinded by another Persian ruler called Achashverosh. Aha, Achashverosh married Vashti. Why did he marry Vashti? Vashti was the heir of the Babylonian throne. So he gave his own rule legitimacy by marrying her. The Persians were very, very different than the Babylonians. The Babylonians were militaristic and brutal. Again, think German. The Persians were into luxury. It was a whole different kind of civilization. Any of you are Persian or know Persians? What?
I know Persians, yeah.
Okay, so think Persians. Think Great Neck, think Los Angeles. You're there? So be in a Persian house. You're there?
Yeah.
Okay, that's Persia. It has a whole different kind of attraction than Babylonia does. Nothing changed in Persia. It's like one of the most consistent civilizations in the world. The love of refinement, of luxury, the business acumen, the materialism. It was there then, it's there now, okay? The refinement is very important also. Okay, so the Jews loved Persians for different reasons than they loved the Babylonians, with whom they became disenchanted. They loved them because the refinement and luxury is very attractive. Then the Purim story came, and they noticed on a group level that people could have very refined tastes and be very cultured externally and be brutal and cruel, etc., as Persians could be. Okay, clear? Okay. So the Jews, again, still in Babylonia, which is now Persia. But after the Purim story played out, Esther is still married to who? Achashverosh. They have a child. The child, according to Jewish law, is Jewish. In Jewish law, you are what your mother is. But he identified himself as a Persian. He didn't want to be Jewish, he wanted to be Persian, which you can understand the temptations of being the heir to the throne. But he gave the Jews the authority, permission, and means of going back to Israel. Then he died. Okay, I'll take you through the Persian succession a different time. You don't want to know about it. But suffice to say that a Persian king called Koresh, Cyrus the Great, who, if you've studied history, you know him, not only allowed the Jews to return, but actually promoted it, funded it, okay? But what percentage of the Jews do you think wanted to leave Persia at this point?
None of them.
Not none, but a little over 20,000 came initially. Okay, clear?
How many were
We don't know how many were left, we only know how many came, but we know it was a small percentage. They were under the leadership of Ezra, okay, who we learned about last class. So Ezra is there, and his goal is, to use his words, to bring the crown back to its former glory. So he did everything to restore Judaism. We don't know his speeches anymore, but what we do know is he got the Jews to do tshuva. Nobody else in history ever did this. Even Moshe didn't do this. Could you imagine what Eshet Torah would do with Ezra's speeches? Okay, you know, like they divorced their non-Jewish wives. It was like nothing like this ever happened, okay? More Jews came. Materially, it still was better in Persia, so it was an uphill battle. The Jews in Israel faced a group of people called the Samaritans, okay, who were forced into living in Israel when the Jews were forced to leave. So they didn't welcome the Jews' return. Have you ever heard of people who didn't welcome the Jews' return?
No.
Never heard of this. They didn't welcome the Jews' return. So they also, there was a great deal of guerrilla warfare. There was a struggle to get world opinion against the Jews. Does this sound familiar? But the Jews prevailed. Okay. Then the Persians were conquered by the Greeks. Got it? So at this point, the Jews are living in Babylon, which became Persia, which is now Greece, or in Israel, which was Israel, and then Babylon, and then Persia, and now Greece. Okay, clear? This is when the Hanukkah story took place. So the Greeks were very different than the Persians. The Greeks created a human-centered world as opposed to a God-centered world. So that meant everything about the human was deified. The human body, human thought. Okay, this is where philosophy, drama, everything came back. And morality became human-centered. If it feels good to me as a human, it must be good. If it feels bad to me as a human, it must be bad. If it feels good and the Bible says it's bad, then the Bible is wrong. If it says that, if it feels bad and the Bible said it's good, then the Bible is wrong. You understand this way of thinking? What do you call this in today's language? Secular humanism. Okay, clear? So the Greeks brought this in. Many Jews fell for it. But the Hanukkah story turned things around. A consequence of the victory of the Maccabees at Hanukkah was that the Jews had their own kingdom again. But it only took 3 generations, are you ready? Before the Maccabees themselves were affected by the Greeks. Could you imagine that? You ended up with Maccabee kings who had names like Jason. It's embarrassing. Okay, clear? So as things happened, one of the Maccabee kings, whose name was Yanai, okay, was very Hellenized, okay, he died, and he left 2 sons. So they began having a civil war about who should rule. They brought in the Romans. One of them brought in the Romans to support his side. And once the Romans came, they never left. Okay, clear? So the 4th and final exile is the Roman exile. So I just want to review this. Babylon, militarism. Persia, luxury and materialism. Greece, secular humanism. What characterized Rome? Rome, first of all, was a democracy. It was a mixture of the other 3. But they also promoted 3 main philosophies. So here they are. The first one is Spartacan Philosophy. These were borrowed by the Greeks, by the way, and changed. That means seeing Spartacus was a city that was into athletic events and meeting those sorts of challenge. So their philosophy is any challenge has meaning as long as it's a challenge. So the way of thinking, climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every... Okay, this is Spartacus thought. What do you think Judaism would say about this? Exactly. A challenge has no value per se. It depends on who's being challenged and what comes forth. A challenge that will leave you a better person or the world a better place has meaning. A challenge like the kind you find in the Guinness Book of Records. You all looked at it? Mm-hmm. Remember the man with the longest nail? Okay, you know. Now, this is a challenge. Realize this man cannot go in an ordinary car. You'd have to have a car with a sunroof. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I spend so much time thinking about, gosh, what's his life like? He can't go any place in an elevator. Okay, can't do air travel. Probably can't sleep in a normal bed. Okay, whatever. So it's a challenge, but like, for what? Right. Got it? Okay. There are all sorts of challenges that are like that. Like, how many teenagers can you fit in a car trunk? Who cares? But athletics are basically not much better than that. I once found myself trying to explain what football was to like an elderly rabbi. He'd recently come to the States. He sees it in the paper. What is this? Okay, there are 2 teams, right? I tell him the whole thing, the ball, the goal. And so he said, and then, one team wins. He said, and then what happens? What's the answer to that question? Yes, they get the ball over the goal, and then, okay. So that's one way of looking at things that we view as antithetical to Jewish thought. The next way is called academia. The idea there is that knowledge is power, and any form of knowledge is as valid as any other form of knowledge. Okay, so on many libraries, it'll say in America, in bigger libraries, it'll say, the truth will make you free, as a way of saying, read all the books, you'll know all the truth, and the truth makes you free. What's the limitation on knowledge? There is a limitation. What about God? What about morality? So when you look at pre-war Germany, they certainly were the academic capital of the world. The same way today, textbooks are in English. Textbooks then were in German. All of the major scientists, many of the major concert musicians and composers, literature, it was all German, but that didn't give them any basic morality. So what we would say is that there is something to be said for knowledge, but it has to be combined with morality and a sensitivity towards God.
So the Romans had knowledge, but they didn't have a sense of morality.
They had enormous knowledge. They picked it up from the Greeks and took it further. Okay, so those are the main philosophies. So we're still considered to be, oh, last one, democracy. I have to talk about that, of course, which is the voice of the people must be true. Does anybody think that's true anymore? No. I mean, the voice of the people, no. Okay. So we're still considered to be in the Roman exile. Not that we encounter Romans very frequently, but this way of thinking is still part of the world and still keeps us away from ourselves. So now we know what the history of exile. So now I want to take you to the function of exile. What's it for? So what I want to tell you is a basic rule in understanding the way people operate, which is the first step in learning who you are is learning who you're not. So I want to illustrate this to you. A very interesting survey was done before World War II in Poland. Societally, people then were moving further away from tradition and trying to integrate into the modern world. So they did a survey in a gymnasia. A gymnasia is the Eastern Europe equivalent of a high school. Although it was more academic than American high schools would be. So they asked the Jewish kids in a Jewish gymnasia, if you could be anything, any race, any religion, any culture, any nation, or your own, who would you be? So what do you think they answered? German.
I was going to say whoever was on top.
Because the Germans were on top, culturally, academically, economically at that time. Okay, different people did a different survey of survivors in one of the large DP camps. I think it was in Feldenheim. I'm not sure which one it was. It was one of the very large ones. And this is totally unrelated to this one. Different sociologists, different reasons. They asked them, if you aren't Jewish, who would you want to be? So they got many different answers. American, a lot of them said, I would want to stay Jewish no matter what. Some of them went for British. But a consistent thing that you got, even though this wasn't the question, was anything but German. So they had a clear sense of who they didn't want to be. You understand this? So the basic rule is we lose track of who we are, and to bring us back, we have to learn experientially who we don't want to be. So that's the core of redemption, is learning that and then saying, and who am I? And who do I want to be? So redemption is a process. So the paradigm for what the future redemption will look like takes us back to the redemption from Egypt, where the Jews knew one thing: they didn't want to be Egyptians. There was nothing about Egypt that they admired anymore. So when Moshe came and said, follow me into the desert and find out who you are, they went. Okay, clear? So now we're going to just begin. We won't finish it all in one class, but we're going to begin by talking about how we will get out of just knowing who we aren't to learning who we are. So there's a step that we have to make, and the rest comes from God. The step that we have to make, that the Jews on a group level have to make, is wanting more, wanting to change, saying this isn't good enough. Making money isn't good enough. Scientific progress isn't good enough. We want more. So I think arguably you could say the Jews have said this experientially, but their definition of more has taken them in directions that their definition of more hasn't always taken them in true directions. So all of the liberal movements have a Jewish core, as you know. So this will include the civil rights movement of the 60s, the liberation of South Africa, psychology, which is a certain form of liberal movement. So they know that they want things to be better, but they don't have a model of where better could come from. But wanting is an important first step. When there's enough critical mass who want more, okay, then Hashem will empower someone who will call Mashiach, which is a phrase I have to explain, to lead us. So again, our paradigm is the liberation from Egypt. Moshe was an ordinary person, born to parents. Okay, we don't know what he looked like anymore, but he probably looked like what? Everybody else. Okay, he was always sensitive, he was always spiritual, he was always brilliant. In every generation, the Talmud tells us, there's someone who has the spiritual capacity to be Mashiach. Going back to Moshe. So Moshe was Moshe when he was 25. He was Moshe when he was 30. He was Moshe when he was 2. Okay? But it was only when he was 80, that Hashem gave him prophecy and told him what to do to change things for the Jews. So when we're ready, Hashem will empower whoever could lead us to a better place to have the prophetic ability to do so. So how do you recognize who's a good leader? Again, Moshe is our paradigm. For someone to be considered a valid candidate as Mashiach, here are the qualifications. They have to be very, very wise, prophetic, very righteous, a physical descendant of King David, and able to show signs of his own prophetic capacity. So, yeah?
Do we have any way of knowing if anyone's descendant of King David today or not?
We actually do, and even Hadassah, who's the secretary downstairs, is actually, she's not Mashiach, but she's a descendant of King David. So here's the basic picture. King David was an ancestor of one of the Talmudic sages, Hillel, who could trace himself easily. Okay? Rashi was a descendant of Hillel. He could trace himself easily. Maharal and various others could trace themselves back to Rashi. Many people could trace themselves back to the Maharal, because you're only talking about 9 generations back, more, 10 generations back. 10 generations? No. More than that, 12 generations back, but it's traceable. So some of the major families of Jewish leadership have been able to trace themselves back to the Maharal.
Can Mashiach be a woman?
No.
Why is that?
Why is it? Because all of the information we have about Mashiach is through tradition. So Mashiach, his role is meant to be like the role of a king, and in Judaism there aren't queens. Okay, clear? So in case you wanted to be Mashiach, no! Okay. Be something else, okay. And so that basically is, so that should give you enough information, not about who Mashiach is, how he'll come and what will happen, which we'll talk about tomorrow, but who isn't Mashiach. You understand this? Could you understand why the sages rejected Jesus in his own time? The case Shabtai Tzvi, who you might have heard of. Do you know who I'm talking about?
That was that guy who said he said he was the Messiah.
Right.
And I've heard sort of about him before.
Right. But he at least was a great scholar and like a person of refinement. He was a better candidate than Jesus, but he wasn't Mashiach. Okay, clear? So we could easily recognize false messiahs, but what we have to talk about next time is who the real Mashiach could be, the qualifications, and what will happen once he comes. Okay? So that's it for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the coming of Mashiach.